Have you heard of the so-called the 5-second rule? Well, that is the idea that if you drop food on the floor and if you pick it up quickly, so within 5 seconds, then it's still safe to eat. Well, today I want to show you why this is actually not really about the number of seconds at all, but it's more about the type of food and how dirty the surface actually is. So hi, hello and welcome again. I'm Oliver, Microbe Hunter here. And in this video today, I want to look at the microbiology behind the so-called 5-second rule and what actually matters when food hits the floor. Now, you often hear this claim: if you pick up food fast enough, so again within 5 to 7 seconds, well, then it really doesn't matter because then bacteria do not have enough time. So it is claimed. They don't have enough time to jump from the floor to the food, and therefore it's still safe to eat. Now, this sounds kind of intuitive a little bit, but actually it is based on a misunderstanding here, because bacteria, they do not sit there waiting and then suddenly they start moving after the timer goes off. Right? It doesn't work like this. The key point is transfer of the bacteria can happen immediately, and it depends much more on the food surface and also on the degree of contamination of the floor, and not really so much on the actual contact time. So let's start with the food. If you drop something moist or sticky, for example, some cut cucumbers, vegetables, a piece of tomato, maybe strawberry, fresh meat, of course, yeah, or maybe even a juicy fruit, then bacteria can stick to it right away because the moist surface forms a thin film of water, a thin layer of water, and as soon as it touches a contaminated surface, then the bacteria are able to attach. Now, whether the food is on the floor for 1 second or for 10 seconds, it doesn't really make a huge difference at all. So for wet foods, the 5-second rule is basically totally meaningless. And if the floor has the wrong bacteria, of course, then they will transfer almost instantly. Now, compare this to dry foods, like, for example, cracker, maybe a cookie, even a potato chip, because they have much drier surfaces and bacteria can still transfer, of course. But usually, they are not able to stick quite as well, and therefore not so many of them are able to stick to the food, especially if the surface is hard and not very sticky. Now here the risk is generally much lower, simply because there is less opportunity for the bacteria to attach themselves and survive on the surface of the food. So now how does this compare now to dry foods, for example like a cracker, a cookie, or even a potato chip? Well, these have a much drier surface and bacteria are still able to transfer, but usually fewer will stick, especially if the surface is hard and not sticky. And here the risk is generally much lower, simply because there is less opportunity for the bacteria to attach and survive on the surface of the food. But then again, survival is not such a big issue. It's more the transfer that we have to worry about. Now, we can actually demonstrate this very easily at home. Imagine that there's this layer of flour that I've got over here. This kind of represents the bacteria on a dirty surface. And if you take a slice of cucumber or any other moist food and drop it onto the flour, then of course the flour is going to stick immediately, because the wet surface forms a thin film of water that holds the particles in place. Now repeat the same thing with something dry like a cracker or potato chip. Well, then of course much less flour will stick. Now the second important factor is of course the cleanliness of the floor. Not every floor is full of dangerous germs. On a regularly cleaned kitchen floor, the probability of finding serious pathogens, like for example salmonella, is usually quite low. On the other hand, floors where people walk with outdoor shoes or places contaminated with animal or human feces, well, I mean, that's a very different story here. Some bacteria, for example like salmonella, and it's a classic example, can already cause problems at relatively low doses. So a relatively low bacterial count is already enough to cause an infection. And this means that in the worst case, even a small number of cells can be enough. But these bacteria are not present on every surface at all times. And the risk therefore depends strongly on how the environment is used and of course also cleaned. And this is why I recommend always take off your shoes when you enter your home. This is also important to remember that we're constantly exposed to bacteria anyway. We inhale them with the dust, they are on our skin of course, and they are part of our normal environment. So we gotta stay realistic here. But not every bacterium is a problem, and the main concern are the so-called fecal bacteria that I already talked about, and other pathogens, because those are more likely to cause an illness. So what does this all mean in practice? Well, first, the 5-second rule, well, as a strict rule, is a myth. There is no magical time limit where everything's still safe and then suddenly it's dangerous. For moist and for sticky foods, bacteria can transfer immediately, as we've seen, and for dry foods, few bacteria will actually stick and the risk is lower. But I mean, it's not automatically zero, of course. And second, what it really comes down to is judgment, right? What kind of food is it? Is it wet? Is it dry? How dirty is the surface likely to be? Is this a kitchen floor that's regularly cleaned, or is it a heavily used hallway with outdoor shoes and pets maybe? Well, personally, if a moist food like a piece of cucumber or carrot lands on a reasonably clean kitchen floor, then I often rinse it briefly under running water to remove any surface contamination, and then I just basically eat it. But if the floor is a little bit dirty, or if I'm not quite comfortable with the situation, then I simply don't eat it because there is no need. And for dry foods, the risk is generally lower, but again, it depends on the context. And the one thing that I never do is I never eat food that has fallen on the ground outside, because there's simply too many unknowns there, and I simply don't feel comfortable, and I think it's plainly also a little bit disgusting. So instead of trusting a fixed time rule like 5 seconds or 7 seconds, it's better to understand what really matters. It's the food type, the moisture, and of course the characteristics and the cleanliness of the surface. Well, I hope that this helped you put the 5-second rule into a more realistic microbial perspective. And as always, of course, I want to wish you all the best. Happy microbe hunting, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye.